All right, friends, we're back in the lab here. It's Locked On Twins, and today we have an entire new batch of free agents for the Twins to look at. We've been talking about all the guys we think the Twins are going to look at, and now it's like Christmas all over again. A bunch of non-tenders to look at. So today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the non-tenders and see who might be a fit for your Twins. This is Locked On Twins.
You are Locked On Twins, your daily Minnesota Twins podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, thanks again for hanging out with us on Locked On Twins. I'm your host, Brandon Warren. You can unfollow me on Twitter at Brandon_WARNE. And joining me again is Answer Dave Brown on Twitter. Dave Brown by regular name. Dave, how are we doing today?
Hello, Twins territory. I'm fine. How are you?
I think Twins territory is good. I'm doing good as well. And again, we want to thank you for making Locked On Twins your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. And of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, encouraging fans to interact with the program. We will be running them live. Now, we're recording them live. We're not recording them and playing them live. But you and I are both, Dave, alive as we do this. And then we set it as a premiere. And that allows people to kind of ask questions as the show goes on. But anyway, what I'm saying is, please feel free to engage with the show, whether it's as it's playing, as it's showing, after the fact. Send questions, comments, queries, conundrums to Locked On Twins on Twitter. We got the DMs open there. So lots of different avenues you can interact with the show, as well as a like, a subscribe, a thumbs up, a super duper great job. Whatever you have that you can give us, we love to hear from you. Today's show brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Mine didn't. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So yeah, my team didn't win last night, Dave Brown. I stayed up and watched it, and I'm an old person. I'm an old person with children, and I stayed up and watched the Vikings lose. So yeah, that was not going to be one of those winning bets for our friends over at FanDuel. How did your team do this weekend?
Hang on. The Bears somehow lost to the Lions, which going in, you would have thought, well, they're probably going to lose.
Yeah.
But they outplayed them for most of the game. But most of is doing a lot of work there. So I thought that Justin Fields did well, and Matt Eberflus coached as he usually does, which is, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and not enough for the most part. So I thought the Vikings soundly outplayed the Broncos too. But there's something about Sean Payton, I think, that maybe brings them together or keeps them confident. And Russell Wilson, of course, is an old soul there at quarterback, so they were able to pull out a win. I thought the Vikings should have won. I thought the Bears should have won, but it's good for the Bears because they get a better draft pick. Not so much for the Vikings because you want them to do well and advance in the playoffs and all that stuff.
Yeah, I was watching double-barreled action. I was watching the end of the Lions-Bears and the end of the Packers-Chargers. So that was kind of fun as I was wrapping up the first part of my work day yesterday, doing my notes and all that fun stuff. But I guess we're not here to talk about football, although, too, again, episode brought to you by FanDuel, so keep that in mind. Today, we're talking about the non-tenders. So the Twins tendered a contract to Kyle Farmer. I want to gauge your level of surprise in that. And as much as I had kind of convinced myself he'd probably be non-tendered, then I looked at, someone had a list of like the best players available at each position. They did it like an all-star format or like a graphic. And second base was Whit Merrifield, which, I mean, he's a decent enough player, but he's not a stud right now anymore. And then shortstop was, why can't I remember? It might have been Tim Anderson is one of the best shortstops available. That should probably tell you. So if Kyle Farmer at $6 million or thereabouts is available, there's probably going to be some suitors if the Twins don't keep him.
Well, $6 million isn't what it used to be either. So
Right.
it sounds like a lot of money, but in these days of inflation, both within and without Major League Baseball, it isn't all that much. That's like Craig Counsell money or whatever he's earning to be the manager of the Cubs.
Right.
Yeah, and Farmer showed himself to be a capable, reliable, multi-positional, uh, good clubhouse dude on the Twins. He's got some value. He can play some difficult position. You can stick him at shortstop if you want, and he was a plus at second base on defense. So, and occasionally he'll run into a pitch and hit a home run. So he's got some value. You'd think that a few teams around the league would uh, agree. So I think Kyle Farmer's a guy who either on the Twins or somewhere else is going to have a major league job.
Yeah, I think it's a good selling point that he was a regular contributor on a good team. They didn't bury him, especially a team with a lot of depth in the middle infield. He was not an afterthought on this team whatsoever, and really, outside of getting hit by a pitch in the face, which even to think about it months after the fact is pretty crazy. He was a constant presence on a team that honestly was better than the record indicated, but made the playoffs, made some noise in the playoffs. I think you look at him as if there's a good team who maybe has like I can't think of a specific player, but like if you're a team with a really great shortstop or third base prospect who's anywhere from 3 to 5 months away, that's a pretty good ripcord option at that spot who you turn into the utility guy once that player comes up. Or if that player never comes up and you start Kyle Farmer 130 times, he gives you 95 weighted runs created plus, plays good defense, and does a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So I think what they'll find is that if there were a few guys traded, Kyle Wright was traded, who won't pitch for a year. A few other guys who, if they were traded for even anything at all, you get the sense that, even if the Twins end up doing like a Gio Urshela trade where they get back just an interesting minor leaguer, that's probably what they're angling for here.
And these things are all kind of hard to read because you mentioned Kyle Wright on the Braves. I heard a report that a whole bunch of the guys who went for Aaron Bummer from the Braves to the White Sox, like Soroka, were probably going to be non-tendered. So you're talking about Farmer is kind of among a group of players where, depending on the situation, they could be non-tendered. They depending on what the team wants to do in free agency, they might be brought back. He's kind of in that group of players where he's about as valuable as a bunch of guys on a major league roster, but it just sort of depends on what else that team has going on the 40-man roster, the space, and their other factors. So, he's a guy that, depending on the time of year, you might be able to get something in a trade. Other times, maybe he's designated for assignment and, and has gone into the ether and comes back as a free agent somewhere else. So it's hard to read too much into value on players like this because other guys who are as valuable as Kyle Farmer were non-tendered. It just depends on their own individual situation.
So before we go into our first break, I want to get your thoughts on that Bummer trade because Twins fans obviously have seen a lot of Aaron Bummer in the years gone by. Numbers maybe don't do justice for what his value was at different points to the White Sox. But at the same time, too, it basically comes down to the White Sox are just kind of going to strip it down. I don't know how far down, as far as if it's Eloy Jimenez down, if it's Dylan Cease down, or all the way down to Luis Robert, which I don't think it'll be. But I think Chris Getz said come and gets it. We'll see what happens there. But as far as the Bummer trade and all the pieces coming back, are you trying to make any finite sense of it, or is it just like, all right, here's a thing that just happened?
I think the finite sense, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, is that Chris Getz, realizes that he's actually come out and said, I don't really like our team in the context, meaning, they've got some talented players, but it doesn't really add up to a winning combination. So the White Sox are definitely in a position where they need depth. And so from that standpoint, he's taken a chance on some guys who, you you trust that the Braves know what they're doing a little bit more than the average team right now, and the guys that are either non-tendered from them or traded from that organization are still going to pique your interest. Soroka and Schuster and um, Shoemake, they're decently talented guys, and the White Sox need depth. And Bummer isn't necessarily a piece where I think he's a free agent until 2026. If the White Sox are rebuilding, you don't necessarily want to do it with a left-handed reliever, even if he's good in the late innings. It's not something, if you can get something for that piece, you're going to do it. So I like the proactive nature of the trade. I still like Soroka because he's a guy who his injuries are lower half. It's not a shoulder. It's not an elbow. It's getting his legs under him, kind of literally.
Right.
And he wasn't really able to do that last year, although in AAA he had a little bit more success than he did it with the Braves. So I like it just from that standpoint. And a couple of the other players are deep. Nick Lopez is a guy, in the farmer sort of area where he can play multiple positions, some of them quite well. He's got almost no power. I mean that literally. And I wish he would get on base more, but and he wishes he did too, I think. But I like it from whether it'll work out or not, I don't know specifically. I like the idea of it. Let's see what happens for the White Sox standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what the White Sox taking a chance on Touki Toussaint too. Is just these are a bunch of guys we've been hearing about for a while. Shoemake, all these guys have had either some potential, some success, or a little bit of both. And so, hey, the White Sox are going to be a breeding ground for post hype sleepers for the next year or so. And so why not start that now?
Yeah. And it's not necessarily, I mean, they also are talking out of both sides of their mouth. They want we're going to compete in 2024. Well, then I know he didn't have a very good ERA, but Bummer had some good side numbers and other indicators that he pitched better than that. And so we're trading one of our best relief pitchers, and we know we won't have Liam Hendricks either. So they let him go, but he was hurt. So the White Sox are, if they contend in 2024, it's going to be like a pleasant surprise kind of thing. I don't really think that's the main goal right now, which is kind of funny because Jerry Reinsdorf said, well, we need a GM like Getz, as somebody who's in the organization. We don't want to go outside because that might take a year for that person to understand what the landscape is and how to get better. But it looks like they're taking that year anyway with Getz, even though he's been in the organization at a lower level. So I would expect the White Sox to shoot for third place at best at this point.
Well, sometimes the gap year is your decision. Sometimes it's your parents' decision. But at the end of the day, it's the same decision. It's just whoever makes it, makes it. Today's episode, by the way, brought to you by FanDuel. We'll talk to them about them, for a brief second, and then we'll come back with some more chat about non-tenders. But first, again, let's talk about our friends at FanDuel. So over at FanDuel, you can score early this NFL season with America's #1 sportsbook. That's right, that's FanDuel. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. So as long as you didn't bet Vikings over Broncos, I think you're probably in good shape. That's $150 though if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, overs, unders, and more. And let me let you in on a little gambling trick. If you bet against the team that you love, you never lose because either they win the game and you're happy, or they lose the game and it pays off.
Okay.
If you're okay. So if you're watching, I only bet on my team to win though. So there you go. So if your interest is piqued by this, again, if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, no better time than the present to get in on the action. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. All right, we're back here into the bullpen, and we're talking about non-tenders, and it's making me kind of hungry, if I can be perfectly honest, but not quite lunchtime here in God's time zone, Central Time. So Dave and I are going to continue talking about some of these non-tenders.
Well, that's
Twins-
never stopped me from eating lunch before it was time. So I'll tell
yeah,
you.
true. You just call it second lunch, third lunch, and so on. I'm a devotee of that thought process. Twins non-tender, 2 players not arbitration eligible. And I think sometimes people might not realize, but you can non-tender any player who is on a renewable contract or arbitration. Giovanni Moran and Ronnie Enriquez. So Moran headed for Tommy John surgery, as reported by our good friend Dan Hayes here in the last couple of days. And then Enriquez, it sounds as though the Twins might try to get him back on a minor league deal, and for Moran, a 2-year minor league deal like they signed with Brock Stewart, who was coming back from some arm stuff. That panned out. Don't know if it will with Moran, but not terribly surprising now that I think about it, that the Twins used these guys to open up a couple 40 spots going into basically wacky season.
It gives them a little flexibility to add some people from the outside. It doesn't have to be one of these non-tender guys, but it could be. So I'm sure they're pouring over the lists right now to see who they want to bring in. I don't know who they have their eye on, but there's a variety. If you want something, you want a position, it's out there.
Yeah. Part of it, you can look at what the Twins would need to grab or want to grab. And part of it is like you can see the players who are diluting certain player pools as far as we talked about the value of Kyle Farmer. That wasn't really affected by the non-tenders. There's very, very precious little up the middle talent. It's a lot of first base DH types, a lot of relievers, maybe a couple third catcher types, some pitchers who haven't quite figured it out. And then a couple of guys whose financials were probably just a little more than teams are willing to spend. A guy who throws the 6th inning for you and does a pretty good job, but you're not going to pay that guy $3 million. So someone like that who comes to mind, Michael Tonkin, former Twin. But we've been talking about Nick Senzel a lot for a non-Reds podcast. But him hitting the market in the if you were to assess the landscape of just the non-tenders, he is really the only one that I would have any thought of playing at any up the middle spot on a regular basis. Do you think that makes him maybe more coveted than we had thought, or is it still going to be kind of like, yeah, someone's going to have to be a good fit for him?
I think Nick Senzel's the kind of guy who is there. There are Nick Senzel people, and then there are people who don't really like him. So I think there's a group of teams and scouts who are intrigued by his athleticism and his versatility and the things that he maybe can do, but hasn't really done in consistently in the majors. So, and he's still a guy at his age where there's optimism, and it's not too foolish to expect him to do something in the future. He's certainly going to get another chance. There's going to be at least 3 or 4 teams that are going to be like, hey, in the right moment, we could turn this guy into a valuable person who could play second base, who could play center field, maybe not that well, but go over to third base and have some value for a team and has some possible upside with the bat. I think, Senzel is a former, high prospect who could be have a really quick peak of 2 or 3 years. That's really good, and you could get he's a guy that you should probably be interested in taking a chance on at this point.
Yeah, I would say, you could sell him on a lot of different teams. For the Twins, it would be, hey, they will use you in the best way possible. But for the White Sox, for instance, team you're obviously very intimately acquainted with, opportunity. I mean, just flat out opportunity, whether it's the Royals, Rockies, White Sox, any number of teams that where they go next year will not be drastically altered by if Nick Senzel has a great or poor year. That's a good gamble to take. So I'm not saying it's necessarily going to make the most sense for him to sign with the Twins or not, But it'll come down to what he prioritizes at this point in his career, because I suspect the level of interested teams or the number of interested teams will be a pretty wide swath of teams, but to see which one gives him the path to the best version of himself, I'll be curious to see how that lands.
Well, I think if you look at things from that standpoint, the Twins would be, it'd be something that he'd be open to. I think.
Yeah.
Look at what happened with Willie Castro last year. He got an opportunity and broke through.
Yep.
And that's, the Twins do have some other pieces that they have Julian, they have Polanco at second base, but you look at a guy, Correa at short. They're going to need people to go over there. Not that Senzel would be a shortstop, but the Twins they'd be able to move some guys around, make space for Senzel in the outfield if necessary. They have spots. They're not they're not against the Twins are open-minded. Let's say about they look at what guys can do well and they try and find spots for them to do that. And I think that is a selling point and might make themselves interesting to him for that reason.
Yeah, the amount of value they got from players that were like Nick Senzel or Nick Senzel-esque, the Donovan Solanos and that, you would feel like you could go in there and contribute. I don't think it's surprising that it's Rocco Baldelli, the manager, from the Rays tree of not only players but coaches, the versatility. You could see a path like that. Twins definitely need help at first base. Now, when you think of needing help, you probably don't immediately think to run to the list of non-tenders. But when you think of the non-tenders as guys who are going to sign one-year deals, almost certainly they're not going to be crazy super valuable, but they could be good players that can hold off, prospect for a time. When I look at the first base-ish guys, and because a lot of these guys are more DHs who somebody throws a fielding glove in their bag when they're not looking, there are a few that come to mind that I am interested in. Mike Ford getting DFA'd by the Mariners to me was interesting, and then subsequently being taken off the roster and non-tendered. Dan Vogelbach, obviously, you get to host a podcast with him because everyone says I look like him. I
had not noticed that, but now that you mention it.
Yeah. Dominic Smith had an absolutely dreadful season, but is still young-ish. There's a few guys cut from this cloth. I'm gonna try to find all of them here. So Rowdy Tellez, who is basically just, I think, Daniel Vogelbach, but wearing a different jumpsuit. Juan Yepez from the Cardinals looks like he has some interesting bat to ball power, not much else. Kyle Lewis, I don't know where he's going to play moving forward. He could probably be a DH type, but Dominic Smith, it just kind of comes down to a lot of very, it's like the Luke Voits of the world, if I were to classify it. What Luke Voit is you, and it's like that quiz you take on Mashable, where it's like what gossip girl are you, or what golden girl are you, and it's you get to kind of pick your own adventure. So do any of those to you stand out as like, hey, that's the one guy the Twins should look at? Because I don't know about maybe, but Mike Ford was the first one I came to, because I remember watching him with the Mariners, and he was interesting. You look at his numbers, you're like, wow, those are maybe even better than I thought. And I don't know. I mean, I just think you're not going to expect much out of that guy. If he gets pushed down by Alex Kirilloff, Jose Miranda, whoever, you're not going to be that upset.
Well, first of all, if we're picking Golden Girls, I would like to be Betty White, if that's possible.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. She's from Minnesota in that show, and so
she off limits.
I'm gonna have to go ahead and deny your request. No, perfectly fine with me. Betty White's a queen, and we stand her for sure.
I don't remember what his total numbers were last year. I'm going to look it up right now, and they were terrible. But 2 years ago, when he was a rookie, Juan Yepez was a guy who, 24, did some pretty good things. Was about 10% above league average for the Cardinals, and they put him in right field. I don't know if you want to put him in right field, but they did it, and he played first base too. And I think that's a guy who he's only 25. I look at I'm not up on why he was so terrible last year. I think some of it probably has to do with opportunity because he didn't play anywhere. He didn't play 30 games.
Well, where are you going to play first base? It's not going to be St. Louis, that's for sure.
No, exactly. I mean, the ghost of Albert Pujols is still there, but now it's Goldschmidt. But
Yeah.
And looking at his AAA numbers, they were okay last year. They weren't great. They were sort of below his norm.
Yeah, like 7 OPS, wasn't it?
Yeah,
7 something.
736 at AAA last year. So
I was thinking of his slugging percentage. Yeah, it was a very like meh kind of season, but like I don't know, if you get to the big leagues and then you're stuck behind Paul Goldschmidt,
yes,
that's rough. That's tough.
And then they send you down to the minors and you don't get an opportunity to do anything.
Right.
It's tough. And the Cardinals were definitely a team last year that got off to a bad start and they got desperate. And unless there's an injury that I don't know about, I think that's your guy. It's Donovan Solano-esque kind of a dude to play first base as a right-handed hitter. Would make a decent platoon with Kirilloff, or you put Kirilloff in left field like we talked about before. Among the guys that we're kind of talking about here, I like him. I also like Adam Simber. I love sidewinders. I love sidewinding relief pitchers. And I think a year removed from his injury, he'll be better going forward.
Well, I'll see your right-handed sidewinder. How about Tim Hill? Absolutely nasty from obviously from the Royals. I saw him pitch for a few years and then traded over to the Padres. But the numbers, they may not be where you want him, especially the strikeouts. He doesn't strike that many guys out. But I feel like the number of uncomfortable plate appearances taken against him per game has to be almost a 1-to-1 correlation with how many batters he faces. And I think too, maybe there's some value to going from facing Tim Hill to facing Joan Duran, or facing Tim Hill to facing Caleb Thielbar, two lefties who will give you just very different angles. I don't know. Tim Hill seems like an interesting cat. Not real talkative. Seemed kind of like he was very introverted. Not that matters. Just my experience with him.
I think personally interviewing him.
Yeah. Like I think he could do well in Minnesota. Lefty, gets people out and just kind of go about his business. But someone you would have seen a fair amount of being in Kansas City.
Yeah. Good looking, crazy delivery. Had more success with the Padres, I think, than he did with the Royals. He would be a guy that,
I'm a left-handed hitter. He terrifies me. As a left-handed hitter, I would rather retire than face Tim Hill.
Well, you might just get your wish. So, but guys like him are also not necessarily that consistent from year to year. And again, unless there's an injury that we don't know about, coming off a down year, maybe he's good for another solid couple of seasons. So, he would be a guy that hopefully the Twins did some advanced work on his scouting, so they know kind of what was going on there toward the end of the year. And if same thing with Simber, if he's able to go, Simber did lead the league in appearances a couple years ago. The Blue Jays were just trying anything to get back into the playoffs, and maybe that kind of led to him having a down year this season. But hopefully, it won't be something that's a long-term deal.
His splits are funny though. Like he will have years where he kills lefties and years where he kills righties, and like no rhyme or reason. But again, too, as part of a unit where, if you have a Simber that you follow with Griffin Jacks, or like, I think there's something to be said for the contrast factor. Or if you have a bullpen with 7 guys who give you 7 different looks, you've got over the top righty who throws 100, sidearm righty who throws 88, sidearm lefty who throws 89 with a big sinker. Like if you can hit a bunch of the archetypes of a interesting reliever, and then you can bring them at all different angles, basically like it's an octopus on the mound, I think that can be valuable.
Do you think the octopus on the mound would have like a Pat Venditti sort of deal where they'd make him throw from one side and they wouldn't let him switch too much in at bats? Like, you mean like 8 switches?
You'd have to declare up front. Yeah, I don't think I think it takes far too much time to have all those different pitches in Rob Manfred's baseball game. And so he'd have to declare ahead of time. But I still think you would maintain the upper hand. I do.
The
As
upper
far
hand, the side hand, the low hand, the
underhand,
underhand. Yeah.
what do you make of Austin Meadows?
I don't
Obviously,
know. I
you want the
mean,
best for him, and if he continues playing, he's going to be probably sought after just for the fact that he's had a pretty solid career. He's a free agent. Hunter Renfro's a free agent. I think of those guys for whatever reason as inextricably related, even though I know they're not. But if people go after Renfro, obviously Meadows is going to be even more desirable as a corner outfield type. I hope he's healthy. I hope he is ready to come back. I hope he is for his sake.
I think the way Meadows left off the end of last season was we're not sure if he's mentally healthy enough to continue playing baseball. He's a real unknown. I don't know where his career is right now, and obviously he's got to get that right, or at least on track to being right. It doesn't have to be 100%, but he's got to be feeling better about himself than he was at his lows if he wants to try and make it, because of the stress and the it's just too hard otherwise. So I think maybe you take him as kind of a reclamation deal where you give him a 2-year deal and you see where this year goes, and then you hope next year is kind of an upside. I don't know that you can count on him for 2024 at this time.
Sure. Josh Staumont, do you think there's anything there?
Maybe. He's got great stuff, although it didn't seem as great toward the end with the Royals as it did, mid-season last year, 2 years ago. I don't know. I don't know where he's at as far as is he healthy enough? Is his stuff still nasty enough to? He's a guy that you're going to give another chance. You're going to bring him into camp and see where the dominoes fall and play the chips wherever they land. So not a big, huge expectation, I would say, but a guy that you bring into camp and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, the last name I'm going to meditate on today is Spencer Turnbull. Obviously, big arm issue costing him 2022, 2023, very uneven, as those things tend to be coming off major arm surgery. But I really liked the direction he was heading. Honestly, going into 2020, obviously then 2020 was a chaotic mess for everyone involved. But I think there's something here. 2021 also, 50 innings, 1.5 Fangraphs WAR. So simple math tells you that's a 6 WAR season over 200 innings. We don't get a lot of 200 inning seasons these days, but it gives us a feel for what he could be capable of, et cetera, et cetera. I would love to see them go after Turnbull, just knowing what they're trying to do, starting pitching wise, what they think they can get out of guys from the current version they are. Turnbull's my guy from this group. What do you think?
The guy threw a no-hitter. He's obviously a talented pitcher. Look into a little bit the issues that he had with the Tigers. There was a disagreement there about the state of his injury, how hurt he was, where he was hurt, in injuries other than his arm. I think it was a toe injury, and allegations of making up an injury so they would keep him on the major league roster, and exactly what was behind that. Is it a matter of the Tigers doing something untoward? Is it Turnbull's attitude? Is it something about the system where baseball players are sort of at the mercy of teams when it comes to injuries? And things like being on a major league roster is you get more money that way. You get better insurance. You get preferential treatment. Exactly what is up with Spencer as far as his health and his situation and why things went the way they did with the Tigers, I don't know. I always like to give the player the benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a mystery, talking to him and his agent, that the Twins are going to have to look into before they go after a guy like that. But on the surface, Spencer Turnbull, definitely a guy that you think you could get some bounce from for sure.
Yeah, and knowing what we know about the Twins, both in terms of fixing players, making them better versions of themselves, and that's one name of quite a few of these non-tenders I could see the Twins being in on. Dave, thank you so much for taking time out of your day, and also to the listeners for taking time out of their day. This has been another edition of Locked On Twins, and we'll see you later.